what I'm proposing now in a partly idealistic kind of way is that schools are sites for building equity agendas. They're sites where we just can't simply reproduce the world as it is as teachers, as learners, that they're sites where in fact there are opportunities to do better in life. So, education is just about the only opportunity for social mobility that there is. You might win the lottery, or you might have an unpredictable rich uncle that you didn't know about who dies. They're all fantasies, really. The only way that social mobility happens is really education. It's the main route to social mobility. So, in a way, partly what that means is we need to build equity agendas where every student can become knowledgeable, become skilled, become an active participating person. And we don't build the system premised on an outcome of inequality, right? So that's another important aspect, I think, of 21st century education, which may be different from the practices of education in the past. Perhaps I'm being a bit idealistic, perhaps a bit naive, but I think we need to set that as our kind of moral compass. That's the social context. So what I want to do now is to try and deal with these words which describe this paradigm of education that we're trying to build together. So, and in a way, one of the difficult contrasts is what's the difference between this and authentic pedagogy? And in a way, there is a kind of a strong continuity and a strong connection and a strong lineage from what I'm arguing for, this new learning, this transformative, this reflexive education, and the progressive movement, which, in one measure began in the 18th century with Rousseau writing against didactic pedagogy. In another measure, in the 20th century, with people like Montessori and Dewey, there were active attempts to build alternatives. So how might, if we say that this new learning, this transformative pedagogy, this reflexive pedagogy is in that tradition, how does it extend that tradition? How is it, in some senses, also somewhat different? So here are the limits of authentic pedagogy. I'm going to give you a little example from John Dewey, who was a great person. So I'm not being totally dismissive of John Dewey in any sense. So what he said was, look, formal education for kids who are working class kids is going to be not relevant to their interests, their lives, their learning. So let's do certain forms of technical education for the boys, and let's do certain forms of home science for the girls. And this is true to their interests, true to their dispositions, true to where they're going in the world. So one of the problems with progressivism is, instead of failing these kids and saying, on the standards of academic curriculum, we're going to bore you and fail you, we create something which is relevant, but by creating something that was relevant, we find another way to reproduce structures of inequality. Authentic then means true to the world, but it doesn't do anything to disrupt the form of the world as it is, with all these endemic inequalities. Now, of course, I'm being hypercritical. I'm only talking about one of the side effects of progressivism, often despite its best intentions. So what we mean by transformative is education that changes the conditions of life. And the conditions of life for each individual learner, so it gives them opportunities, it takes them beyond their horizons of possibility, or their immediate, limited, restricted horizons of possibility. It pushes those horizons further. And there are many cases where this actually does happen. So people talk, for example, about resilience, about students who deal with all the exigencies of their life in a reflective kind of way and move forward and get outside those conditions which are often less than favourable. And there are some sort of demographic groups, for example, immigrants, who actually do, not as a whole, but some immigrants end up doing well just because there's this incredible motivation on parents in the migration process, which transfers onto kids, and the kids do end up doing better than the previous generation. So it is possible to use education to transform the conditions of an individual's life. But the question is, also is how can we use education to transform the conditions of social life? How can we build knowledge systems, communities, ways of life which are more participatory, where we have more agency, where we're more in control of our everyday lives? How can education be transformative in those senses? So whereas authentic pedagogy or progressivism often falls back to being another reflection of the world as it is, here we have an active change agenda where we want to create another world, either for an individual student or for the social context that we're in. And what reflexive means in this context is these forms of engagement, these forms of interaction, which might be a learner and their learning, kind of feedback loops there. Instead of the, as I say, the classic transmission model from the centre out to the periphery of the teacher to the student, the textbook to the student, the syllabus to the school, those kinds of models of transmission media, that what we've got is things which are far more engaging, where students are active builders of their own knowledge, and there's constant feedback around that, hence the notion of reflexivity. So there, I'm trying to draw these distinctions, perhaps subtle, perhaps fine, between the models of progressivism and authentic pedagogy and this third model that we're now trying to characterise.